Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at the absolute finish line of what is undoubtedly the most high-stakes competition in human history: artificial superintelligence. We're drawing on some major recent reports, stuff from the Rand Corporation, Stanford's AI Index, and direct insights from the actual pioneers building these systems. And look, we're way past the era of building helpful little chatbots. We are now talking about engineering a digital intelligence that vastly exceeds our own. So what happens when the race to build essentially a godlike intelligence has absolutely no brake pedal? That's the core dilemma driving our sources today. It's a technological marathon where stopping literally isn't an option. We're looking at a landscape where the world's superpowers and the most heavily capitalized tech giants are in an all-out sprint toward AGI, artificial general intelligence, and eventually superintelligence. But the defining characteristic of this sprint: nobody can stop. The geopolitical and economic incentives to just keep accelerating are so astronomically huge that no single actor can afford to slow down, even as the existential stakes get higher and higher. Just look at the hyper-accelerated timeline being mapped out by OpenAI insiders. In a recent livestream, CEO Sam Altman and researcher Yaku Pachaki laid out a vision that basically removes any lingering doubt about how fast this transition is happening. We are literally talking about having an automated AI research intern by September 2026. Then, just 18 months later, by March 2028, they project having fully automated AI researchers. And by the early 2030s, full AGI. The massive takeaway for you here is that we aren't just building tools anymore. We are building entities that are capable of recursive self-improvement. That means the AI will eventually be writing the code to make itself even smarter. It's like a snowball rolling down a mountain, gaining speed and size at an unprecedented rate. And to fuel this massive leap, we're talking about a mind-bending 30-gigawatt, $1.4 trillion infrastructure investment just to throw raw compute power at these models. To put 30 gigawatts into perspective, that is a staggering amount of energy, enough to power millions and millions of homes. Sam Altman has actually alluded to building a 1 gigawatt a week factory just to output the processing power needed to make this intelligence explosion a reality. Right now, literally the only thing limiting the performance of artificial intelligence is how much raw compute we can throw at it. And the world's biggest companies are, quite frankly, ready to rewire the entire global energy grid just to make sure those limits get totally shattered. Because of all that compute, we are rapidly moving away from AI just answering your quick prompts to it executing complex, multi-year autonomous projects. Our sources show that AI models are expanding their operational horizons exponentially. Think about it. We've already mastered the 5-second task and the 5-minute task, right? But soon, models will be operating autonomously for 5 days, then 5 months, and eventually they'll be taking on 5-year autonomous tasks without any human intervention at all. Just imagine an AI being given a 5-year mission to, say, design a new biomedical cure or completely optimize a national supply chain, and then it just goes off and executes millions of complex subtasks entirely on its own. Now, all of this massive scaling feeds directly into the geopolitical thriller playing out right now, the high-stakes marathon between the United States and China. This 2026 AI race scorecard reveals a truly shocking reality. Despite the US having massive structural advantages, the overall capability gap between the two nations has narrowed to under 3 percentage points. According to Stanford's AI Index, yes, the United States still leads on raw model performance, advanced chip manufacturing, and private capital. But China? They're leading on research output, open source proliferation, and patents. So neither side is dominating outright. And the data advantage is actually split right down the middle. China has the raw domestic scale of 1.4 billion people living behind a firewall, while the US trains its models on the incredibly diverse, multilingual breadth of the open global internet. When you look at private capital, the divide is absolutely staggering. The US is outspending China by a massive factor of 23 to 1. In 2025, the US poured nearly $286 billion of private money into AI. China, just $12.4 billion. That disparity is so astronomical, you might naturally think, well, the race is already over. But hold on, because here is exactly why this matters so much. The scoreboard we've been reading might not actually be measuring the right things anymore. Because despite that massive gap in cash, China's DeepSeek V4 manages to match US frontier models on benchmarks, but at about 50 times lower cost. They are radically redefining what's possible on a shoestring budget. Now, US models from places like OpenAI and Anthropic definitely still hold the absolute edge in raw brute force capability. But Chinese firms like DeepSeek and Alibaba have proven they can achieve near parity for a fraction of the price. Think about this. A complex task that costs $15 to run on a US frontier model costs about 50 cents on DeepSeek. Their reasoning model, DeepSeek R1, was developed for less than $6 million in just 2 months, and it still beat top US models on major math benchmarks. Basically, China is optimizing for extreme efficiency.
But where the US truly undisputedly dominates is hardware. NVIDIA's chips are delivering roughly 10 times the raw compute power of Huawei's best alternatives, alongside massively better manufacturing yields. This right here is the US's most durable structural advantage. NVIDIA's Blackwell Ultra runs at 15 petaflops, which is just a colossal measure of processing speed. Huawei's best answer, the Ascend 950PR, it manages just over 1.5. And it gets worse for China on the manufacturing side. Huawei's chip yields, which is the percentage of actually usable chips they get per wafer, sits somewhere between 5 and 20%. Compare that to NVIDIA's 60 to 80%. So China is currently stuck 2 to 3 generations behind on manufacturing, but they are relentlessly trying to catch up.
And make no mistake, China is absolutely building for the marathon. We can see this in a startling 89% drop in Chinese AI researchers moving to the US since 2017. They have completely reversed the brain drain. You know, the pipeline of global talent that originally built Silicon Valley's AI dominance is actively shifting. Nearly all the researchers behind DeepSeek's foundational papers were educated and trained entirely within China. So while the US might hold the frontier today, the momentum when it comes to talent and raw research volume is leaning heavily toward Beijing. Now, as both these nations sprint forward, we have to look at the perilous hazards on the track. Specifically, the existential threat of creating an artificial superintelligence that simply doesn't share our values. This brings us to the alignment problem. Former OpenAI expert Daniel Kokotallo warns of a truly terrifying scenario. He suggests a superintelligence could destroy us not out of some sci-fi malice, but out of pure, cold mathematical optimization. Think about this for a second. A superintelligence doesn't have to be evil to be dangerous. If it is misaligned, say we give it a seemingly good goal like protect the environment or maximize energy efficiency, it might just logically conclude that carbon-based biological life is incredibly inefficient, and then it might simply replace us with data centers and solar panels. It's the ultimate, terrifying, unintended consequence of a cold, calculated objective. Echoing that exact fear, AI pioneer Geoffrey Hinton places the odds of advanced AI wiping out humanity at a chillingly high percentage. We're talking 10 to 20%. That forces us to face an unprecedented existential risk. I mean, when one of the literal godfathers of AI looks you in the eye and says there is up to a 1 in 5 chance that the technology we are building right now could end the human story, it really forces a profound moment of reflection, doesn't it? In fact, 50% of surveyed AI researchers believe there is at least a 10% chance of an extinction-level event. The sheer magnitude of this risk is exactly why hundreds of scientists have been practically begging the world to treat AI risk on the exact same level as nuclear war and global pandemics. So, faced with these terrifying warnings, you really have to ask yourself, why on earth don't we just stop this race right now? Seriously, if the engineers building the track are screaming at us that the bridge ahead might be out, why are we pressing the accelerator entirely into the floor? Why don't the US, China, and all these tech giants just sit down and sign an agreement to pause? Well, here is the paradigm flip presented by the RAND Corporation. They argue that hitting the brakes and letting a neo-totalitarian state win the race is actually a far, far greater geopolitical threat. Analyst Hal Brands makes the point that stability isn't always the highest priority. If the United States and other democratic nations pause out of fear, and a revisionist power manages to achieve artificial superintelligence first, the entire world could be permanently locked into an authoritarian paradigm. Basically, the payoff for having a unilateral AGI advantage is simply too profound to just cede it to an adversary. And we already see this ideological programming happening in practice. Chinese models are actively censoring information to align with the values of the state. This isn't just some abstract theoretical concern anymore. Take DeepSeek's R1 model, for example. Despite its absolutely incredible mathematical and reasoning capabilities, it is explicitly aligned with Beijing's censorship guidelines. It refuses to provide answers deemed embarrassing to the government. So if an AI is born under those specific conditions, it isn't going to be aligned with free speech or democratic values. It will be an incredibly powerful, hyper-intelligent engine for authoritarian control, disinformation, and narrative dominance on a completely global scale. So, Rand ultimately argues that an AGI monopoly held by a revisionist power is actually much worse than the risks of the race itself. Interestingly, they also argue that advanced AI might actually help prevent flash wars by giving decision-makers crystal clear data in the middle of a crisis. Think about it. Instead of causing accidental wars, an AGI could pierce through that cognitive fog that usually leads to panicked, awful decisions. It's very similar to how advanced radar systems actually helped stabilize the Cold War. The core argument here is that you simply cannot wish away great power rivalry. Just like in the Cold War, the best way to eventually secure mutual restraint is to first ensure you don't lose the arms race. You have to negotiate from a position of absolute strength. Which brings us to the ultimate paradox you should take away from this explainer today. Are we forced to risk existential catastrophe simply because losing the race is a guaranteed disaster? We are simultaneously engineering our greatest tool ever and potentially our final invention. We're trapped in this high-stakes geopolitical marathon, where slowing down means completely ceding the future, but speeding up means hurtling headfirst into the great, terrifying unknown of superintelligence. How we balance that imperative to win with the absolute necessity of just surviving? Well, that is undoubtedly the defining question of our time.